The ink on the birth certificate wasn't even dry yet. The heart rate monitor was still beeping a steady, exhausted rhythm. But there were no flowers in the room. No balloons. No congratulations, Mom and Dad. There was only the sharp thwack of a manila envelope hitting the hospital bed sheets. "Sign it," the old woman hissed, adjusting her diamond brooch. "David doesn't need a dead weight anymore. He needs a wife with a future." Celine looked at her husband, the man whose child she had just pushed into the world 20 minutes ago. He wouldn't even meet her eyes. She reached for the pen, not with trembling hands, but with a terrifying calmness. They thought they were discarding a poor orphan. They didn't know they were declaring war on the owner of the very hospital they were standing in. The sterility of the VIP suite at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City felt colder than usual. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park was dusted in the gray slush of a mid-January afternoon. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rubbing alcohol and betrayal. Celine sat propped up against the pillows, her face pale and beaded with sweat. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead, and her entire body throbbed with the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that only childbirth brings. In the bassinet next to her lay Leo, a tiny, wrinkly bundle wrapped in generic hospital blankets. He was sleeping, blissfully unaware that his father, David Caldwell, was standing 3 feet away, refusing to look at him. "David?" Celine's voice was a rasp. She reached a hand out, her fingers trembling slightly. "Do you want to hold him? He has your nose." David Caldwell, a man who usually prided himself on his tailored navy suits and perfectly coiffed blonde hair, looked like a cornered animal. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting to the door as if looking for an escape route. "He doesn't want to hold it, Celine." A sharp, icy voice cut through the room. Margaret Caldwell stepped out from the shadows of the room's corner. David's mother was a woman who wore her cruelty like she wore her vintage Chanel ostentatiously and without apology. She marched to the bedside, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. She didn't look at the baby. She looked at Celine with a sneer of pure disgust. "We aren't here for a family reunion," Margaret said, dropping her expensive leather clutch onto the bedside table. She pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto Celine's legs. "We're here to wrap up loose ends." Celine stared at the envelope. The bold text at the top was upside down, but the word dissolution was unmistakable. "What is this?" Celine whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "David? What is she doing?" David finally looked up. His face wasn't filled with the love he had promised her at the altar 3 years ago. It was filled with pity and fear of his mother. "I'm sorry, Celine," David mumbled, wringing his hands. "But things have changed. My promotion at Caldwell Logistics. It requires a certain image, a certain type of partner." "A partner?" Celine felt a laugh bubble up in her chest, bordering on hysteria. "I'm your wife. I just gave birth to your son 10 minutes ago. And that is the only reason we waited this long," Margaret interrupted, stepping between Celine and David. "We let you have the child. We are even generous enough to let you keep full custody. We don't want the burden. But you are done." Margaret leaned in closer, the smell of her overpowering floral perfume making Celine nauseous. "Let's be real, dear. You were a charity case, a foster kid with no name, no money, and no connections. David had his fun, but now he's moving up to the C-suite. He's going to be the VP of operations. He needs a wife who brings capital to the table, not a waitress who brings a debt." Celine looked at David, searching for the man who used to sneak her cheap tacos after her shift, the man who swore he didn't care about her empty bank account. "Is that true, David?" she asked softly. "You're leaving me because I'm poor?" David flinched. "It's not just that, Celine. It's Tiffany." The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. "Tiffany?" Celine repeated. "Tiffany Roche?" "Yes," Margaret beamed, answering for her son. "Tiffany Roche, the daughter of the CEO of Roche & Co., a real heiress. She and David have reconnected. She can give him the life he deserves. She can merge our companies. What can you give him? Dirty diapers and a mortgage?" Celine closed her eyes for a moment. Tiffany Roche. She knew that name. Not because Tiffany was a socialite, but because Roche & Co. was a mid-tier construction firm that had recently been begging for a contract with Sterling Industries, the global conglomerate that owned half the skyline of Manhattan. The conglomerate that Celine secretly owned. Celine opened her eyes. The tears she had been holding back evaporated. A strange coldness settled over her, masking the physical pain of her body. "So," Celine said, her voice steadying, "you want a divorce because you think I'm worthless. And you want to marry Tiffany Roche because you think she's powerful." "Precisely," Margaret scoffed. "And don't think about fighting this. The prenup you signed was ironclad. You get nothing. No alimony. No house. You take the brat, and you leave." David pulled a pen from his pocket, a Mont Blanc Celine had saved up 6 months to buy him for his birthday, and held it out. "Just sign it, Celine, please. Let's make this easy. I'll send you some cash for the baby's formula now and then." Under the table, Celine looked at the pen. Then she looked at the baby. Leo let out a soft whimper. She realized then that the man standing before her wasn't a victim of his mother's manipulation. He was a willing participant. He was weak, and worse, he was stupid. "Okay," Selena said. Margaret blinked. "What?" "I said okay." Celine took the pen. She didn't read the terms. She flipped to the back page, found the signature line, and signed Celine Caldwell with a flourish. Then, underneath it, she dated it. She handed the papers back to Margaret. "You're making a mistake," Celine said, her voice dropping an octave. "But it's the last mistake you'll ever make regarding me." Margaret snatched the papers, checking the signature greedily. "The only mistake we made was letting David marry a nobody in the first place. Come on, David. Tiffany is waiting at the bistro for celebration drinks." David hesitated, looking at his son one last time. "Goodbye, Celine," he whispered. "Goodbye, David," Celine replied. "Don't come back when the weather changes." They turned and walked out the door, leaving Celine alone in the silence. For 3 minutes, Celine sat in silence. She listened to the receding click-clack of Margaret's heels down the hospital corridor. She waited until the elevator dinged, signaling they were truly gone. Only then did she exhale. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. The pain was sharp, agonizing, but she ignored it. She walked over to the bassinet and picked up Leo. He was warm, smelling of milk and new life. "It's just you and me now, little guy," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "And honestly, that's for the best. You don't want that DNA rubbing off on you." She walked over to the bedside table, where her battered old smartphone lay. She picked it up and dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. It was a number saved simply as the architect. It rang once. "Miss Sterling?" A deep British voice answered immediately. It was calm, refined, and laced with urgent concern. "We received the alert from the hospital security. Are you all right?" The director of medicine informed me that the Caldwells just left the premises. "I'm fine, Charles," Celine said, her voice transforming. The rasp of the victim was gone, replaced by the polished, authoritative tone of a woman who controlled a board of directors. "But I'm done playing house." "Understood, ma'am," Charles said. "Did they?" "They served me papers. Divorce. Abandonment. They think I'm destitute." Celine walked to the window, looking down at the streets of Manhattan. Somewhere down there, David was hailing a cab to go meet a woman whose father's entire career depended on Celine's signature. "David is leaving me for Tiffany Roche." There was a pause on the line, followed by a dry, unamused chuckle. "Roche? As in, the subsidiary contractor we are currently auditing for embezzlement?" "The very same," Celine said, a dark smile playing on her lips. "Charles, initiate Protocol Phoenix. I want my name back. I want my assets unfrozen, and I want the car downstairs in 10 minutes. It is already waiting at the VIP exit, Miss Sterling, along with your personal medical team to transport you and the young heir home." "Shall I prepare the announcement?" "Not yet," Celine said, her eyes narrowing. "Let them have their celebration drinks. Let them think they've won. I want to see the look on Margaret's face when she realizes she just evicted the landlord." "Very good, ma'am." "And regarding the Caldwells? Destroy them," Celine said softly, "but do it slowly. I want to watch." She hung up. Celine moved to the small closet in the room. When she had checked in, she had brought a duffel bag with cheap pajamas, playing the part of the struggling wife. But hidden at the bottom of that bag, stitched into the lining, was a black velvet pouch. She ripped the lining open. Out tumbled a diamond ring, a 10-carat flawless pink diamond, the Sterling family signet. She slid it onto her right hand. It fit perfectly. She stripped off the hospital gown. She didn't have her couture clothes, but she had a simple black tracksuit. She put it on, zipped it up, and wrapped Leo securely in the carrier. She walked out of the room. The nurse's station was buzzing. As Celine approached, the head nurse, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had treated Celine Caldwell with mild indifference earlier, looked up. Her eyes widened when she saw the ring flashing on Celine's hand. Mrs. Higgins stood up abruptly. She didn't say a word, but she bowed her head. She knew. The senior staff at Mount Sinai knew who really owned the building, even if they had been sworn to secrecy for 3 years. Celine walked past them, head high. She took the private elevator, the one marked maintenance, which actually required a retinal scan to access. When the doors opened on the ground floor, she didn't exit through the main lobby where regular people waited for Ubers. She exited through a side door that led to a private loading dock. Waiting there was not a yellow cab. It was a fleet. 3 blacked-out Range Rovers flanked a phantom Rolls-Royce. 4 men in suits, wearing earpieces, stood at attention. The man in the center, an older gentleman with silver hair and an impeccable charcoal suit, stepped forward. It was Charles Montgomery, the Sterling family attorney and her most trusted guardian. He opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce. "Welcome back, Miss Sterling," Charles said, bowing low. He glanced at the bundle in her arms. "And to you, young Master Leo." Celine slid into the leather interior, the scent of fresh roses and expensive mahogany washing over her. It was the smell of her old life. The life she had run away from to find something real. She had found something real, all right. She found real greed, real betrayal. As the convoy pulled out onto 5th Avenue, merging aggressively into traffic, Celine looked out the tinted window. She saw a billboard on a bus stop. It was an advertisement for Caldwell Logistics, featuring David's smiling face with the slogan, "Trust Family." "Charles," Celine said, pressing the intercom button. "Yes, ma'am?" "Get me the acquisition files for Caldwell Logistics and Roche & Co. on my desk by tonight." "Consider it done." "Where to, ma'am? The penthouse?" "No," Celine said, her eyes cold as ice. "Take me to the Pierre Hotel. I believe that's where my ex-husband is having his celebration drinks." Charles paused. "You just gave birth 2 hours ago, ma'am. Are you sure?" Celine looked down at the divorce papers she had shoved into her pocket. "I'm not going in to fight, Charles," she said. "I'm just going to say hello to the happy couple. I have a wedding gift to deliver." The interior of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was a cocoon of silence, separated from the chaotic noise of Manhattan by layers of bulletproof glass and acoustic dampening. Celine sank into the hand-stitched leather, her body finally registering the seismic trauma it had endured. The adrenaline that had powered her march out of the hospital room was beginning to wane, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in her abdomen. Every bump in the road, no matter how absorbed by the car's suspension, sent a fresh ripple of pain through her midsection. "Ma'am?" Charles's voice came from the front passenger seat, soft and concerned. He turned around, holding a small silver vial and a bottle of Voss water. "Dr. Evans provided these before we departed. Stronger than Tylenol, but safe for nursing. You are pale." Celine took the water but pushed the vial away. "I need a clear head, Charles. If I take the painkillers, I'll get groggy, and I need to be sharp for what comes next." She looked down at the bassinet secured in the specialized car seat next to her. Leo was sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed too fragile for this world. A pediatric nurse, a woman Celine had employed years ago for her friends and trusted implicitly, was already seated on the other side of the baby, checking his vitals with a silent, professional efficiency. "He's perfect, Miss Sterling," the nurse, Elena, whispered. "His vitals are strong." "He's a Caldwell," Celine murmured, her voice laced with bitterness. "Half of him comes from a man who just traded him for a corporate title." She turned her gaze to the window. They were passing Central Park. The trees were bare, skeletal fingers reaching up to a steel-gray sky. It reminded Celine of the last 3 years. She had stripped herself bare to be with David. She had hidden her identity as the heiress to the Sterling fortune, a fortune built on real estate, shipping, and medical technology, because she wanted to be loved for herself, not her checkbook. She had played the role of the struggling orphan perfectly. She worked double shifts at a diner. She clipped coupons. She let Margaret Caldwell sneer at her cheap shoes at Thanksgiving dinners. She had endured it all, believing that the struggle was building a foundation of genuine love. "Charles," Celine said, her eyes still on the passing city. "Read me the summary on Roche & Co." Charles opened a leather folder. "It is grim, ma'am. Tiffany Roche's father, Richard, has been leveraging company assets to cover gambling debts in Macau. They are technically insolvent. The merger they are proposing to Caldwell Logistics is a Trojan horse. They need Caldwell's liquidity to plug their own holes before the SEC audits them next month." Celine let out a dry, humorless laugh. "So, David isn't marrying into money. He's marrying into a federal indictment." "Precisely," Charles noted. "And since David is set to become the VP of operations, his signature will be on the acquisition papers. He will be liable for the debt. Margaret thinks she is securing a dynasty. She is actually signing their death warrant." "Don't warn them," Celine said instantly. The command was cold, absolute. "I wouldn't dream of it, ma'am. But I want to expedite the pain," Celine continued, turning away from the window. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass. She looked tired, yes, but the fire was back in her eyes. "Who holds the debt for Roche & Co.?" Charles paused, checking a tablet. "A holding company called Vanguard Credit. High interest, aggressive collection tactics." "And who owns Vanguard?" Celine asked, knowing the answer. Charles smiled, a thin, shark-like expression. "Sterling Industries, ma'am. Through a shell corporation. Call the loan," Celine whispered. "Tonight, while they are toasting, that will freeze all of Mr. Roche's personal accounts immediately," Charles warned. "It will cause a scene." "That," Celine adjusted the diamond ring on her finger, wincing as she shifted her hips, "is exactly what I'm counting on." The car began to slow. They were approaching the Pierre Hotel, a bastion of old-world luxury on Fifth Avenue. It was the kind of place Margaret Caldwell loved because it made her feel like royalty, even though she tipped like a pauper. "We are here," Charles announced. "Do you wish for me to accompany you inside?" Celine looked at Leo one last time. She reached out and stroked his cheek with the back of her finger. "No. Stay with my son. Keep the engine running. This won't take long." "And your attire, ma'am?" Charles glanced delicately at her black tracksuit. It was high quality, but it was gym wear. In the Pierre, it was practically sacrilege. Celine smirked. "I own the hotel, Charles. I can walk in wearing a garbage bag and they'll call it couture." She opened the door. The cold January air hit her face, sharp and biting. It felt good. It felt like armor. The lobby of the Pierre was a symphony of marble, gold leaf, and hushed conversations. A massive crystal chandelier, the size of a small car, hung from the frescoed ceiling, casting a warm, amber glow over the guests. As Celine limped through the revolving doors, the pain in her abdomen flared hot and sharp, nearly buckling her knees. She gritted her teeth, forcing her spine straight. She would not limp. She would glide. The concierge, a man named Henri who had been working there for 20 years, looked up sharply. He saw a woman in a tracksuit, hair messy, face pale. His instinct was to signal security. Then, he saw her eyes. Then, he saw the ring. Henri's face drained of color. He dropped the phone he was holding. He scrambled out from behind the mahogany desk, bypassing a confused Saudi prince who was waiting for his key. Miss Sterling," Henri stammered, bowing so low he nearly headbutted the carpet. We were not expecting you. The penthouse is always prepared, of course, but not tonight, Henri," Celine said, her voice carrying effortlessly over the lobby noise. She didn't stop walking. "I'm looking for a party. The Caldwells." Henri swallowed hard. "Ah, yes. Mr. Caldwell and his guests. They are in the rotunda room. Table 4, by the window. Is the bill settled?" "No, ma'am. They have ordered the 98 Dom Perignon, 2 bottles." "Put it on my personal tab," Celine said, not breaking stride. "And Henri, if anyone asks, you've never seen me." "Of course, Miss Sterling." Celine moved toward the rotunda room. It was an oval-shaped lounge, famous for its hand-painted murals and $30 cocktails. It was the kind of place people went to be seen. And there they were. Table 4 was the best seat in the house, overlooking the park. Margaret Caldwell was sitting with her back to the door, her posture rigid and triumphant. David sat across from her, looking flushed, his tie loosened. Next to him, clinging to his bicep like a decorative vine, was Tiffany Roche. Tiffany was everything Celine wasn't allowed to be. She was blonde, loud, and draped in a red dress that cost more than David's car. She was laughing a high, tinkling sound that grated on Celine's nerves like broken glass. Celine stopped 10 feet away. She stood in the shadow of a large potted fern, just watching them. To the future. Margaret raised her flute. To getting rid of the dead weight and bringing in the gold. To the future, David echoed, clinking his glass against hers. He took a large gulp of the champagne. God, I feel 10 pounds lighter already. I mean, I feel bad for Selene, sure. But she didn't fit, you know? She was so plain. Plain? Tiffany giggled, tracing the rim of her glass. David, honey, she was a waitress. You can't turn a Honda into a Bentley just by parking it in a garage. Margaret roared with laughter. Oh, I like that. A Honda. That's exactly what she was. Reliable, boring, and high mileage. Celine felt a cold fury settle in her chest. It wasn't the anger of a scorned wife anymore. It was the calculated judgment of an executioner. She stepped out of the shadows. I'd be careful with that analogy, Tiffany, Selene said, her voice cutting through their laughter like a razor blade. Bentleys require a lot of maintenance. And if you can't afford the gas, they're just expensive lawn ornaments. The laughter at table 4 died instantly. David choked on his champagne. He spun around, coughing, his eyes bulging. Margaret stiffened, slowly turning her head as if her neck were rusted. Tiffany just looked confused, her mouth hanging slightly open. Celine? David wheezed, wiping sparkling wine from his chin. What? What are you doing here? Selene walked up to the table. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She reached out, pulled an empty velvet chair from a nearby table, and dragged it over. The screech of the chair legs against the parquet floor was excruciatingly loud. The entire room fell silent. She sat down, right between Margaret and Tiffany. I was in the neighborhood, Celine said, crossing her legs. She smoothed the fabric of her tracksuit pants. And since I technically paid for this champagne, I thought I'd stop by to see if it's corked. You paid for it? Margaret scoffed, finding her voice. Her eyes darted around the room to see if anyone was watching the scene. Don't be delusional. You can't afford the water in the finger bowl, let alone the wine. Get out of here. You're embarrassing yourself. Am I? Celine tilted her head. David, you look pale. Is it the shock? Or is it the realization that you left your newborn son alone at the hospital to come drink with? This? She gestured vaguely at Tiffany. Tiffany bristled. Excuse me? This has a name. And this is about to be his wife. Security. Tiffany raised her hand, snapping her fingers at a passing waiter. Waiter, get this trash out of here. The waiter, a young man named Paolo, froze. He looked at Tiffany. Then he looked at Celine. He saw the ring on Celine's finger, the sterling signet. Paolo bowed his head to Celine. Can I get you a glass, miss? Madam? Tiffany's jaw dropped. What? I said kick her out. A glass would be lovely, Paolo, Celine said calmly. And bring a bucket of ice. This conversation is going to get heated. David stood up, his face red. Celine, stop this. You signed the papers. It's over. Go back to the shelter or wherever you're going. I'll send you a check tomorrow. A check, Celine repeated. She looked at him with profound pity. David, do you remember when we met? You told me you wanted to build something of your own. You wanted to escape your mother's shadow. I am building something, David snapped. I'm merging with Roche & Co. Right, Celine said. She turned to Tiffany. How is your father, Tiffany? Last I heard, he was having some trouble with his liquidity. Tiffany's eyes narrowed. My father is a titan of industry. We are worth millions. On paper, Celine corrected. But paper burns so easily. Celine reached into the pocket of her tracksuit. Margaret flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon. Instead, Celine pulled out her phone. It buzzed. It was a text from Charles. It is done. Vanguard has recalled the loans. Celine smiled. It was a terrifying smile. David, she said softly, I told you I had a wedding gift. I realized I didn't give it to you. I don't want anything from you, David spat. Oh, you'll want this, Celine said. My gift is clarity. She placed the phone on the table, screen up. It showed a live stock ticker. What is this? Margaret demanded, peering at the screen through her spectacles. That, Celine pointed, is the stock price of Roche & Co. Watch it closely. Why? Tiffany asked, her voice trembling slightly. Because, Celine whispered, 3 minutes ago, their primary creditor just called in all their debts, freezing their assets. All of them. That's impossible. Tiffany laughed nervously. Vanguard Credit loves us. My daddy has a deal with them. Vanguard Credit, Celine said, locking eyes with Tiffany, doesn't make deals with people who cook their books, Tiffany. And neither do I. At that exact moment, Tiffany's phone, sitting on the table, began to ring. The caller ID flashed. Daddy. Tiffany stared at the phone. Then she stared at Celine. Answer it, Celine urged gently. I think he might need a loan. Maybe David can help? Tiffany snatched the phone. Daddy? What? Slow down. Who? What do you mean the accounts are locked? What do you mean they're towing the yacht? The silence at the table was absolute. Margaret's face had turned a shade of gray that matched the winter sky. David looked like he was about to vomit. Tiffany lowered the phone, her hand shaking violently. She looked at Celine with pure horror. Who? Who are you? Celine stood up, wincing slightly as the pain returned, but she ignored it. She picked up the bottle of Dom Perignon, which was still 3/4 full. I'm just the dead weight, Celine said. She poured the contents of the bottle onto the table. The expensive golden liquid splashed over the white tablecloth, soaking into David's lap and ruining Margaret's clutch. Oops, Celine deadpanned. Clumsy me. Must be the exhaustion from, pushing a human being out of my body 2 hours ago. She turned to leave, but stopped and looked back at her mother-in-law. Oh, and Margaret? Margaret looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrible realization. Enjoy the hotel, Celine said. I'll make sure the staff gives you the friends and family discount. Wait, I don't have any family here. She turned to the waiter. Paolo. Full price for table 4. And add a 200% gratuity for the mess I just made. Yes, Miss Sterling, Paolo said clearly. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Sterling. David froze. Margaret stopped breathing. Tiffany dropped her phone. Celine didn't look back. She walked toward the exit, the pain in her body, nothing compared to the fire in her soul. She had fired the first shot. But the war had just begun. The silence in the rotunda room of the Pierre Hotel was heavy, suffocating, and sticky with the scent of spilled champagne. For 10 seconds after Celine walked away, nobody at table 4 moved. The name Sterling seemed to bounce off the frescoed walls, echoing in the minds of the 3 people left behind. Margaret Caldwell was the first to break the paralysis. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply lowered her hand to the table, her fingers trembling so violently that her diamond bracelet rattled against the china. Sterling, she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. David, did you hear what that waiter called her? David was staring at the wet stain spreading across the crotch of his trousers. He felt cold, but sweat was pouring down his neck. He made a mistake. He must have. Celine is. She's Celine. She's a nobody. She worked at a diner, Mother. I saw her pay stub. She made $12 an hour. People can lie, you idiot. Tiffany shrieked, shattering the hush. She was clutching her phone, staring at the screen where her father's desperate text messages were scrolling by. My dad, he says, the accounts are frozen. All of them. Even the offshore ones. He says, Sterling Industries bought the debt an hour ago. Tiffany looked up, her mascara beginning to run. David, who is your wife? Ex-wife, David corrected automatically, though his voice lacked any conviction. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly. I need to ask her. This is a misunderstanding. Maybe she's an assistant for the Sterlings? Maybe she stole the ring? Go, Margaret hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. Fix this, David. If she really is a Sterling, my God. We just handed her a divorce settlement that asked for nothing. If she is a Sterling, we just walked away from $500 million. David ran. He sprinted out of the rotunda, ignoring the glares of the other patrons. He ran into the lobby, his dress shoes slipping on the marble. Celine, he shouted. He saw the back of her black tracksuit near the revolving doors. She was moving slowly, leaning heavily against the arm of the older man in the suit, Charles. Celine, wait. David lunged forward. Suddenly, a wall of black wool blocked his path. It was Henri, the concierge. Usually a man of obsequious smiles and gentle bows, Henri now stood with his arms crossed, his face like granite. Behind him, two large hotel security guards stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell," Henri said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I believe your evening is concluded." "Get out of my way," David panted, trying to look over Henry's shoulder. He could see Celine getting into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. "That's my wife. I need to talk to her." "Miss Sterling does not wish to be disturbed," Henri said firmly. "Miss Sterling?" David stammered. "So it's true? She owns this place?" Henri didn't answer. He simply stared at David with a look of profound professional disdain. "Your tab has been settled by the lady. However, you are no longer welcome as a guest at the Pierre. Please collect your mother and Miss Roshan vacate the premises immediately, or I will have the police escort you out for trespassing." David watched through the glass of the revolving door. He saw the heavy door of the Phantom close. He saw the silhouette of Celine's head against the headrest. She didn't look back. Not even once. Outside, inside the safety of the car, the facade finally cracked. As soon as the door clicked shut and the car pulled away from the curb, Celine collapsed. The adrenaline that had fueled her walk into the hotel evaporated, leaving behind a tidal wave of agony. "Ma'am?" Charles turned around from the front seat instantly. Celine let out a guttural sob, clutching her stomach. The pain was blinding. She curled into a ball, her forehead pressing against the cool leather of the seat. "I'm okay," she gasped, though her face was gray. "I'm okay. Just breathe." Elena, the nurse, was already moving. She checked Celine's pulse and adjusted the blanket over her legs. "You overexerted yourself, Celine. You gave birth 3 hours ago." This was madness. "It was necessary," Celine whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. She reached out blindly until her hand found the side of the bassinet. She felt the warmth of her son. "Did I do it, Charles? Did they see?" "They saw, ma'am," Charles said softly. "You struck the first blow, but now you must rest. The war will still be there tomorrow." Celine closed her eyes. The image of David's shocked face burned into her mind. It wasn't satisfaction she felt, not yet. It was just a hollow, aching grief. She had loved him. She had really loved him. And he had looked at her like she was garbage until he found out she was gold. "Take me home," she whispered. "Take me to the fortress." 48 hours later. The headquarters of Caldwell Logistics was a glass and steel tower in Midtown Manhattan. It was impressive, but it was nothing compared to the skyscrapers that surrounded it. It was a mid-tier building for a mid-tier company. David Caldwell adjusted his tie in the reflection of the elevator doors. He looked terrible. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His phone had been ringing non-stop, lawyers, Tiffany screaming, his mother plotting. Tiffany had been dumped. Not by him, but by circumstance. Roche & Co. had filed for emergency bankruptcy protection yesterday morning. Tiffany had fled to the Hamptons to hide from the paparazzi. But David still had a job. He still had his promotion. He was the incoming VP of operations. He had a contract. And today was the quarterly board meeting where his promotion would be officially ratified. "It's going to be fine," he muttered to himself as the elevator climbed. "Celine is angry. She's rich. Fine. But this is business. She can't touch me here." Caldwell Logistics is a family company. Mom is on the board. Uncle Jerry is the CEO. The elevator dinged on the 40th floor. David stepped out, ready to flash his signature smile to the receptionist, Brenda. But Brenda wasn't there. The desk was empty. The usual Caldwell Logistics logo on the wall behind the desk, a blue globe, was gone. In its place was a blank white wall, the paint still smelling fresh. David frowned. He walked down the hallway toward the boardroom. The office was strangely quiet. People were at their desks, but they weren't working. They were whispering, huddled in groups. When they saw David, they didn't wave. They looked away. "What is going on?" David whispered. He reached the double mahogany doors of the boardroom. He could hear voices inside. He straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and pushed the doors open. "Sorry, I'm late," David announced, putting on his best executive voice. "Traffic on the bridge was a nightmare, but I'm ready to." The words died in his throat. The boardroom table was full. But it wasn't the usual faces. Uncle Jerry wasn't at the head of the table. His mother, Margaret, wasn't in her usual seat to the right. Margaret was there, but she was sitting in a folding chair against the back wall, looking small and terrified. Uncle Jerry was standing by the window, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Seated at the head of the table, in the CEO's high-backed leather chair, was a woman. She was wearing a white power suit that looked like it had been tailored by angels. Her dark hair was blown out in a sleek, professional style. On the table in front of her sat a single glass of water and a black folder. She spun the chair around slowly to face him. "Hello, David," Celine said. David stumbled back, gripping the doorframe. "Celine? What are you doing in Uncle Jerry's chair?" "I'm chairing the meeting," Celine said calmly. She gestured to the empty seat at the far end of the table, the lowest seat. "Sit down. You're late." "This is insane," David laughed nervously, looking at his mother. "Mom? What is she doing here?" "Call security." "Sit down, David," Margaret shrieked from the corner. Her voice was shrill, desperate. "Just do what she says." David froze. He had never heard his mother sound like that. He walked stiffly to the chair and sat down. "Now that we are all here," Celine began, opening the black folder. "Let's review the agenda. Item 1, the acquisition." "Acquisition?" David asked dumbly. "We were acquiring Roche & Co." "No," Celine corrected, not even looking at him. "That deal is dead. Roche & Co is currently being liquidated to pay off its creditors. One of those creditors is Sterling Industries." She looked up, her eyes hard. "However, during the due diligence for that failed merger, my auditors found something interesting. It seems Caldwell Logistics was leveraging its own stock to fund the merger. You were overextended. Vulnerable." She tapped a manicured fingernail on the table. "So," she continued, "Sterling Industries bought the debt. And then we bought the shares. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I own 51% of Caldwell Logistics." David felt the room spin. "You? You bought the company? To get back at me?" "Don't flatter yourself, David," Celine said coldly. "I bought the company because it's a decent asset that was being managed by idiots. I'm going to strip it, restructure it, and fold it into my shipping division. It's purely business." "You can't do this," David stammered. "I have a contract. I'm the VP of Operations." "Ah, yes." "Item 2, Celine said. She pulled a piece of paper from the folder and slid it down the long mahogany table. It stopped perfectly in front of David. It was a termination notice. "You were the incoming VP," Celine said. "But the new board has decided to go in a different direction. We're looking for leadership with integrity and loyalty." David looked at the paper. "Termination for cause? What cause?" "Gross misconduct," Celine said. "Moral turpitude. And nepotism. Take your pick. Uncle Jerry has already agreed to step down to save his pension. Your mother has been removed from the board effective immediately." David looked at his uncle. The old man wouldn't make eye contact. He looked at his mother. She was weeping silently into her hands. "Celine, please," David said, his voice cracking. He stood up, his hands shaking. "We're family. We have a son. You can't just destroy my career. How am I supposed to support him?" The room went deadly silent. Celine stood up. She didn't look tired today. She looked like a queen. She walked slowly down the length of the table until she was standing right in front of David. She leaned in close. She smelled of expensive perfume and cold resolve. "You don't support him, David," she whispered. "You gave up that right when you tossed a pen at me in a hospital bed. You wanted a divorce? You got it. You wanted a rich wife? You missed her." She straightened up and looked at the 2 security guards standing by the door. "Escort Mr. Caldwell out of the building," Celine commanded. "He has 10 minutes to clear his desk. Anything left behind will be incinerated." "Celine." David reached for her arm. The guard moved faster than lightning, grabbing David's wrist and twisting it behind his back. David yelped in pain. "Don't touch me," Celine said, her voice dropping to 0 degrees. "I'm not your wife anymore, David. I'm your boss. And you're fired." As the guards dragged David backward out of the room, he looked at her one last time. He saw the woman he had ignored, the woman he had belittled, standing tall in the center of the empire he had always wanted to join. "Mom!" David yelled as he was hauled into the hallway. "Do something." Margaret didn't move. She just watched Celine with terrifying awe. When the doors closed, Celine let out a long breath. She looked at the remaining board members, strangers she had appointed, plus a terrified Uncle Jerry. "Right," Celine said, smoothing her jacket. "Now that the trash has been taken out, let's talk about quarterly projections. Time has a way of balancing scales that money cannot." It had been exactly 1 year since that freezing afternoon at Mount Sinai Hospital. The New York winter had returned, biting and gray, coating the city in a layer of frost. In a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in Queens, the radiator clanked noisily, struggling to fight the chill. David Caldwell sat at a small, wobble-legged IKEA table, staring at a microwave dinner. He looked older. The golden tan he used to maintain was gone, replaced by a sallow, tired complexion. His hairline had receded, a casualty of stress and sleepless nights. "David," Margaret's voice rasped from the living room, where she slept on a pull-out sofa. "The TV is fuzzy again. Fix it." David closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. "It's the antenna, Mom. We don't have cable. I can't fix it." "Useless," she muttered, loud enough for him to hear. "Everything is useless." Margaret Caldwell had lost everything. When Celine liquidated the board of Caldwell Logistics, she had exposed years of Margaret's expense account fraud. Margaret hadn't gone to jail. Celine had been merciful enough to decline pressing charges, but the scandal had made Margaret a social pariah. Her friends on the Upper East Side stopped returning her calls. The country club revoked her membership. She had been forced to sell her townhouse to pay off the legal fees and the IRS. Now, she lived here. With David. David stood up and grabbed his coat. He needed air. He worked the night shift as a floor manager at an Amazon fulfillment center now. It was grueling. Physical work, the kind he used to mock his employees for complaining about. "I'm going to work," David called out. "Don't forget to buy milk," Margaret yelled back. "And not the cheap kind." David slammed the door. He took the subway into Manhattan. He arrived early, getting off at 96th Street. He found himself walking toward Mount Sinai Hospital. He didn't know why he came here. Maybe it was penance. Maybe it was masochism. As he turned the corner, he saw the lights. The hospital entrance was transformed. Searchlights swept the sky. A red carpet was rolled out. Paparazzi were lined up 3 deep behind velvet ropes. A massive banner hung over the main entrance. Grand opening. The Leo Sterling Pediatric Wing. David froze. The crowd was cheering. Limousines were pulling up, depositing celebrities, politicians, and tycoons. And then, the phantom Rolls-Royce pulled up. The crowd went wild. David stepped back into the shadows of a scaffolding, pulling his collar up to hide his face. The door opened. Celine stepped out. She was breathtaking. She wore a midnight blue gown that shimmered like the night sky. She didn't look like the exhausted, frightened woman he had abandoned. She looked invincible. The diamonds around her neck were worth more than David would earn in 10 lifetimes. But she wasn't alone. Holding her hand, taking wobbly but determined steps, was a 1-year-old boy in a tiny tuxedo. Leo. David's breath hitched in his throat. The boy had David's blonde hair, but he had Celine's eyes. He was laughing, waving at the flashing cameras, completely unafraid. Celine bent down and scooped Leo up onto her hip. She whispered something in his ear, and the boy kissed her cheek. The love between them was palpable. A warm, glowing force that seemed to heat the cold air. A reporter thrust a microphone toward Celine. "Miss Sterling, a year ago, you were a mystery. Now you're one of the most influential women in the city. What drove you to build this wing?" Celine paused. She looked directly at the camera. For a second, David felt like she was looking right at him, piercing through the shadows in the distance. "I built this," Celine said, her voice amplified by the speakers, "because I know what it feels like to have nothing but hope, and I know what it feels like to be discarded." She adjusted Leo on her hip. "A year ago, I learned that family isn't blood. It isn't a name on a marriage license. Family is the people who stay when the room is cold. Family is loyalty. I built this for my son, Leo. So he grows up knowing that his value comes from his heart, not his inheritance." The crowd erupted in applause. "One last question," the reporter shouted. "Any word on your ex-husband, David Caldwell?" David flinched. He held his breath. Celine smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was worse. It was indifferent. "Who?" she asked. The crowd laughed. Celine turned, taking Leo's hand again, and walked up the red carpet, disappearing into the warmth and light of the hospital she now ruled. David stood in the cold for a long time. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Tiffany Roche. She texted him sometimes, usually when she was drunk. She was working as a hostess in a club in Miami now. Tiffany. Hey, miss you. Can you lend me $50? David deleted the text. He looked at the hospital one last time. He realized then that Selene hadn't just taken his money. She hadn't just taken his company. She had taken the narrative. She was the hero. He wasn't even the villain anymore. He was a footnote. A who? He turned around and walked back toward the subway station. The wind picked up, cutting through his thin coat. He had a shift to work. He had boxes to pack. And when he got home, he had a mother to feed who would never stop reminding him of the kingdom he had thrown away for a mirage. The ink on the divorce papers had dried a long time ago, but the bill was something he would be paying for the rest of his life. And that is the story of Selene Sterling. She proved that the best revenge isn't just success, it's erasing the people who hurt you from your story entirely. David and Margaret chased the appearance of wealth and lost the only thing that actually mattered: family. They thought they were discarding a burden, but they were actually throwing away a lottery ticket. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many people walk away from diamonds because they're wrapped in rough paper? What do you think? Was Selene's punishment too harsh, or did David and Margaret get exactly what they deserved? I want to hear your opinion. Drop a comment below with Team Selene or Team Mercy. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on the next crazy true life drama. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.